So I'm reading 3 stories today from Luke chapter 9. Each of these, in most Bibles, you'll see has got a different title, but they were put in by editors and translators. They weren't part of the original manuscripts. And I'm realizing that our familiarity with these labels, these headings, can actually lull us into a false sense of security about what we're going to read. The first story is headed The Transfiguration, but if we title it, Huge Energy Pulse on Mountain Top with Light Show Reveals Long Dead People, you might sit up and listen. Or the following story, Untamed Child Goes Berserk. So, today's stories really are quite otherworldly and actually very weird. So, Luke 9. About 8 days later, Jesus took Peter, John, and James up a mountain to pray. And as he was praying, the appearance of his face was transformed, and his clothes became dazzling white. Suddenly, 2 men, Moses and Elijah, appeared and began talking with Jesus. They were glorious to see, and they were speaking about his exodus from this world, which was about to be fulfilled in Jerusalem. Peter and the others had fallen asleep. When they woke up, they saw Jesus' glory and the 2 men standing with them. As Moses and Elijah were starting to leave, Peter, not even knowing what he was saying, blurted out, "Master, it's wonderful for us to be here. Let's make 3 shelters as memorials, one for you, one for Moses, and one for Elijah." But even as he was saying this, a cloud overshadowed them, and terror gripped them as the cloud covered them. Then a voice from the cloud said, "This is my son, my chosen one. Listen to him." When the voice finished, Jesus was there alone. They didn't tell anyone at that time what they'd seen. The next day, after they'd come down the mountain, a large crowd met Jesus. A man in the crowd called out to him, "Teacher, I beg you to look at my son, my only child. An evil spirit keeps seizing him, making him scream. It throws him into convulsions so that he foams at the mouth. It batters him and hardly ever leaves him alone. I begged your disciples to cast out the spirit, but they couldn't do it." Jesus said, "You faithless and corrupt people, how long must I be with you and put up with you?" Then he said to the man, "Bring your son here." As the boy came forward, the demon knocked him to the ground and threw him into a violent convulsion. But Jesus rebuked the evil spirit and healed the boy. Then he gave him back to his father. Awe gripped the people as they saw this majestic display of God's power. While everyone was marveling at everything he was doing, Jesus said to his disciples, "Listen to me and remember what I say. The Son of Man is going to be betrayed into the hands of his enemies." But they didn't know what he meant. Its significance was hidden from them, so they couldn't understand it, and they were afraid to ask him about it.
I've been asked more than a few times, what is your favorite spot that you have visited in the Holy Land? And for me, it's not a difficult question to answer. It's Jabal Tabor, better known as Mount Tabor, the traditional site of what is known as the Transfiguration of Jesus. The mountain is in Lower Galilee. It's surrounded by the green Jezreel Valley running away in all directions. Massive oak trees and evergreen trees grow on top, casting their shade. And wind from the Mediterranean makes that mountaintop almost perfect. Now, to get to the top of that mountain is an adventure in and of itself. If you get a chance to visit, you will likely arrive there on a tour bus. The bus will only take you about halfway up. At a staging area, the bus will stop where you can use the restroom if you are willing to pay. Visit a pomegranate juice stand if you're willing to pay. And board a smaller taxi if you're willing to pay to take you to the top. The smaller taxi will be able to negotiate the hairpin turns and the switchbacks as the tour bus would find these to be impossible. And when you get to the top, you'll pass through an iron gate, if you're willing to pay. And there you will find the evergreens and the offshore winds, fantastic views, and 3 major compounds atop that mountain. First, there is an impressive Greek Orthodox monastery there, begun in 1859, completed in 1911, though it sits atop where much older churches once were. It's all that you would expect in a grand monastery. It has a bell tower, great rock walls, iron gates, steeples, chanting monks. The second great compound is a Franciscan monastery, a Roman Catholic facility. The Franciscans came to this mountain in the 1300s. They returned 500 years later when granted permission by the Ottomans. Their monastery is as equally stunning as their Orthodox brothers across the way. And finally, you will arrive at the Church of the Transfiguration, a basilica actually, built in 1924, there in that picture you see it, over the ruins of much earlier churches. The Church of the Transfiguration is a gorgeous work of art. It is constructed completely of alabaster, all white and bright, symbolizing the blazing glory that descended upon Jesus at the top of the mountain. Within it, it contains 3 different chapels. One is dedicated to the prophet Elijah. The second is dedicated to Moses, both who briefly joined Jesus on the mountain. And the third central chapel is dedicated to Christ Himself. Architect Antonio Barluzzi, who designed and oversaw the construction of the church, set a glass plate in the floor of the central chapel so that on August 6th of every year, the day of the Transfiguration, the sun will strike that glass plate and illuminate the golden mosaic on the wall above the altar one day a year. Everything is perfect about Mount Tabor, and everything is wrong. While it will remain my favorite locale in all of Israel, it holds that place with a few objections. Number 1, Mount Tabor is not really a mountain, it is a hill. The sinking valley below makes it appear much taller than it is. 2, please stop serving pomegranate juice to the pilgrims. When they come to that hillside, that stuff goes right through you, and then you have to pay 5 shekels to use the bathroom. 3, why did the Franciscans build a church exactly as Simon Peter wanted to? One for Elijah, one for Moses, and one for Jesus, when Peter's impulsive development order was nothing more than that. It was impulsive, the blabberings of a man overwhelmed by what he was experiencing, that was quickly matched with a booming voice from heaven that terrified everyone. It doesn't seem quite right. 3, while August 6th is indeed the traditional day of the Transfiguration, we have no idea whatsoever when the Transfiguration actually occurred. And finally, it is likely that Mount Tabor is not even remotely the actual location where the Transfiguration took place. A quick dive into church history. Early in the 4th century, the Roman Emperor Constantine is said to have converted to Christianity. He did not. He co-opted Christianity for his own political, military, social, and economic purposes, and it's been going on ever since. Regardless, at the Council of Nicaea in 325, Constantine was asked to build a great church at the traditional site of Jesus' crucifixion and resurrection. It would become the Church of the Holy Sepulchre. Constantine's mother, who was in fact a Christian, was sent to the Holy Land to oversee the construction of this church. Her name was Helena. Helena built that church. Plus, while she was there for some 7 or 8 years, she built the Church of the Ascension on the Mount of Olives, the Church of the Nativity in Bethlehem, the Church of the Annunciation in Nazareth, and the Church of the Transfiguration atop Mount Tabor. No one at the time really considered Mount Tabor to be the location of the Transfiguration. But Tabor was only 5 miles away from Nazareth. And Helena had that other big building project going on there, conveniently, that took several years to build. And then Mount Tabor is simply the tallest hill in closest proximity to Nazareth. And Helena was living there for a number of years. And so you could see that on the horizon, even on a cloudy day, and you find a holy Bedouin or an old mystic, and they'll say, oh yeah, that's where the spot was. And before you know it, you got pomegranate stands and basilicas and well-placed porta potties. The Mount of Transfiguration is actually likely this one, Mount Hermon, located in the Golan Heights, some 9,000 feet above sea level. This location fits the narrative and the timeline of the Gospels superiorly so, but Hermon is 75 miles away from Nazareth, 300 miles from Jerusalem, and often snow-covered. It's not very convenient for Helena, her builders, or the shekel-carrying pilgrims who would follow for the centuries to come. Nonetheless, if you get a chance to go to Mount Tabor, do it. It is stunning. It will remain my favorite place, and this story today is one of my favorite stories. And it's not because of what happens on the mountain. It's because of what happens after Jesus comes down from the mountain. We get the power and glory Jesus at the top. It's bright lights, alabaster, booming voices from heaven, and flabbergasted disciples. Anna's introduction, as usual, was perfect. And truly, Simon Peter would very much have liked to have remained there. He might have even taken vows as a Franciscan monk and built a church if Jesus would have left him. It was all just so good, and too glorious. But then we get the earthy and gritty Jesus, the frustrated and punchy Jesus, whose patience has just about been depleted. We can stand in awe of the Jesus on the mountaintop. We've never seen anything like that. But we can really love the Jesus in the valley below. He reminds us of what it's like to live in the real world. This is part 7 in this series of talks on the Serenity Prayer. Let's revisit. Written by Reinhold Niebuhr in the 1930s, adapted by the recovery movement in the 1940s, it is the greatest single North American contribution to contemporary spirituality. The ground we have covered so far. God, grant me the serenity to accept the things I cannot change, the courage to change the things I can, and the wisdom to know the difference. Living one day at a time, enjoying one moment at a time, accepting hardships as the pathway to peace. And now this morning, taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. One more time. Taking, as Jesus did, this sinful world as it is, not as I would have it. Theologians have deliberated for centuries about the significance of the Transfiguration, and I'll leave the finer points of that discussion to others, except to say that this brilliant mountaintop experience must have energized Jesus and His disciples for the journey ahead, because the journey ahead was going to be very tough. Jesus would descend the holy mountain, march toward Jerusalem, into controversy, into suffering, and onto a cross. The mountain was needed because the journey into the valley lay immediately ahead, a valley chock full of confusion, bewilderment, suffering, and more questions than answers. So Jesus didn't take the disciples up to the mountain so that they could live there forever. He took them there to give them a little fuel, to bolster their faith, to encourage them as they descended into the valley. You will have to go back into the valley, for as sure as the occasional moments of glory, there is the daily task of just gutting life out below. And as sure as the dazzle of heaven is the dullness of earth. We need the mountain. We should visit as often as we can to breathe that lofty, rarefied air. But then, encouraged and filled with wonder, we hit the trail. We descend the mountaintop to live real lives of real faith in a real world among real people with real problems. You can't stay on the mountain all the time. You'll just get lightheaded You can't maintain that perfect ideal. You can only catch flashes of it. You can't think that we are going to arrive at some utopia at some point in life. That's not realistic. The world, as it is, not as I would have it, is hard. It is sinful. It is stained. It is imperfect. It is sometimes downright evil, ugly, and mean. And if you want to get miserable and remain miserable, continue to be surprised by these facts. Say things like this: I just never thought I'd see anything like this in my lifetime. What makes you so special? I can't believe that this is happening to me or happening to someone that I love. I just don't understand why he acts that way or she acts that way. Look, it's human nature. It's how people are. It's how the world is. Accept it. Then you might be able to find your way through it. For as it is said, the first step in solving a problem is admitting that you have one. And our problem is that we live the majority of our days down in the valley when we think we should be on the mountain. It's okay. Just accept that this is what the world is. It's not the world that I would have made. You can lodge your complaints with management, but I don't know if you'll hear back. And here comes Jesus and His disciples off the Mount of Transfiguration. And what do they encounter? It's a scene right out of The Exorcist. Here is this poor, afflicted boy, afflicted by some kind of evil, some terrible sickness. The biblical writers always speak of such cases as possession by an evil spirit. It's the only language that they had. We need not pick that apart. This is real, profound, chronic suffering. And then there is the boy's father, like any father of a tormented child, a sick child, an addicted child. He is desperate for something that will help his son, desperate for a fix, a tonic, a medication, an exorcism, a healing. And then there are the other 9 disciples, Jesus' representatives. They are astoundingly powerless to do anything about what they are facing. Shrugged shoulders, blank faces, that's all they've got. And then the other Gospels include that there's another group standing there as all of this plays out. The religious leaders of the day. They aren't praying for the boy. They aren't trying to help the father. They are laughing, mocking the entire scene. Are you with me this morning? Say amen. Here is the world of Jesus. Here is our world. To be in this world is to encounter suffering, to face what is inexplicably wicked, to see justice and evil grind and mangle people under its boot. To be in this world is to see others completely wrecked by desperation, by need, by fear and panic, wishing that they could do something about the impossible situation that they or their loved ones are in. People looking for answers. To be in this world is to realize that those who could and should do something to actually help others will more times than not be unwilling or unable to do so. They can't gin up the will or the power, or they cannot find the courage or the means. And yes, to be in this world is to observe that in this whirling wind of misery, there are those, and they are often the religious types, who find the suffering of others entertaining. They can laugh and joke at the misery that they see, but because they already have their first-class seat booked on the heavenly jet, they just don't seem to be bothered by it all. Here is the world as it is. There are those tortured by evil and injustice. There are those desperate for help and answers. There are those without the will or ability to be a part of any solution. And there are those who callously point their fingers, write the suffering and desperate masses off, and go on their way. This is what Jesus walked into when He came off of that mountain. This is what Jesus walked into most every day of His human life. This is what we all walk into if we have the eyes to see it. Well, how does Jesus take it? Oh, He's ticked. He is steaming. Not at the afflicted and the desperate, at His own disciples. Did you hear that? You are faithless and corrupt, He says. You can't be trusted. I thought I could count on you. Why did I ever put my confidence in you in the first place? The word corrupt in the Greek means disaster. You are a disaster. I like this Jesus. I wouldn't want to be caught in the crosshairs of this Jesus. But I get it. And you do too. The people around Him, the trauma of living in this world. On one hand, it's nothing but problems. On the other hand, it's utter incompetence. And sometimes it is a holy thing to run a little hot. And Jesus is running hot. But He does not let the ineptitude of others or the discouragement of that situation stop Him from doing what He could do and what He had to do. He reaches out and heals the afflicted child because that was the right thing to do. And you know how it is. If you want to get something done right, what do you have to do? Just do it yourself sometimes. Here's one of the most parabolic stories I could ever tell you about living in an evil, ugly world. Accepting that. But then doing what you can and must do anyway. Here are two pictures of the same young man, Wells Crowther. One when he was a boy, and the other after his graduation from Boston College. When he was little, his father stuck a folded white handkerchief in Wells' top coat pocket and said, "Wells, this one is for show." And then he gave him a red bandana, and he said, "Keep this in your back pocket. This one is for blow." This, blow, not any other kind. And Wells kept that red bandana with him from then on out. He wore it as a junior firefighter. He wore it under his ball cap and hockey helmet through high school. And later, when he played on scholarship, played lacrosse at Boston College. When he got a job as an equities trader, he stuck it in his back pocket and took it to Wall Street. He took it with him to work on the morning of September 11th, 2001, to his desk at the 104th floor of the South Tower of the World Trade Center. The South Tower was the second building struck that morning. Wells was now 24 years old, but he was up to date on all of his fire and rescue training. He took that red bandana out of his pocket, he wrapped it around his face to ward off the smoke, and he dove in. Triaging the wounded, he called out to them these words: "If you can stand, stand now. If you can help others, do so, and follow me." Wells led survivors down to the 40th floor where they were met by first responders, sometimes carrying the wounded on his back. He would drop them there, turn around, and run back up the stairs. "I'm going back to help," he would say, as he disappeared into the smoke, time and time again, bringing others out until the building collapsed. For months, survivors spoke about the mysterious young man in the red bandana who had saved them, but none knew who he was. Wells' parents came forward and filled in the blanks and learned for themselves about the heroic role that their son had played. Singularly, he had saved 24 people that horrific morning. His family and friends said it was just in him to be like this, to be of service. He believed that people mattered, that life mattered, that helping others counted for something, even more so when the world was at its worst and when the world was on fire. Wells was already planning his departure from Wall Street, though his bosses did not know it at the time. He was going to take that prestigious education and go back to the fire hall and become a New York City firefighter. It was 6 months before Wells's body was recovered from the rubble of the collapsed towers. He was found surrounded by fallen firefighters he had been assisting. And no DNA test was required to know who he was. A red bandana like a halo was still tied around his head. These are the stories worth remembering. These are the people who should inspire us. These are the people who who provide us an example. As Mr. Rogers said to me when I was a kid from the television, when you're afraid, look for the helpers, because they're always there. His last words, if you can stand, stand now. If you can help, do so, and follow me into a real world of real people in need of real rescue.